Aikman and Buck were on SVP, like they go on after the game. And I just pulled the audio. I think you shouldn't have any trouble hearing this, but this is what Troy Aikman said about Kyle Shanahan and about the 49ers.
Kyle Shanahan, if I was in a position to hire a head coach and I could hire anybody I wanted, Kyle Shanahan would be that guy. The way that he's able to utilize his personnel, but they play a style of football that you just don't see around the league. It's an old school style, and in a league today where there's so much emphasis on player safety and not much contact, not many padded practices during the week, they play like the game I used to know it. So not many teams can match that if they're not accustomed to seeing it. I like them a lot.
Did he just get like a half chub talking about like the good old days?
He did get excited to talk about the good old days. Yes.
Was he also saying like all you idiots that always say that Kyle deserves to get fired or isn't good enough? I swear to God, if anyone's willing to hire me as a GM, he'll be my first call.
Yeah. And he also was taking the opportunity. I think one of the reasons he likes Kyle, and you could hear what he said, is he thinks that the league is not playing good football right now. And he thinks the league is not playing its best football right now because the players, when given the chance to negotiate in the collective bargaining agreement, could not get the monetary wins that they wanted. So instead chose less practice. And you can hear him. He thinks it's hurting the sport. That's what he's saying right there. And he thinks that the Niners are at an advantage because of the way that they play. Like, I think I didn't hear, I was rewinding because I heard him say it. I rewound. I didn't hear exactly what Scott's question was. And I don't know. I'd be curious what you thought about what he just said. But I took what he just said as partly him saying, I think this is one of the best teams in the NFL right now. Which, by the way, I mean, they're in first place in the division means at 6-4. They're the 3 seed in the NFC right now.
Well, and since they've had McCaffrey, they've been pretty good. I think what he's saying is simply a lot of the league is soft, and a lot has to do with the format of how you have to structure the league. And the hitting in the league is dramatically different through the rules / the practicing. It's just not, you can't be as physical, so you can't develop a physical style. Also, when you add in like a lot of the spread concepts and the passing has softened the league. Like, remember, he played on one of the greatest rushing teams ever. And they, historically, we talk about like the 27 Yankees. People talk like the Cowboys offensive line. Like, it's just an all-time great offensive line. Shove it down your throat. It was always the knock. Like, is Emmett actually better than Barry Sanders, or was he better just because he ran behind that offensive line? Which, like, listen, you play with who you play with, but the 49ers and the Cowboys were fucking heavyweight fighters, right? They were locked and loaded with defensive players and offensive players that would hit you in the jaw. So if you were a good player on a good team in the 90s or even the late 80s when Troy got here, all the teams were physical, right? Eagles, Giants, Niners, Commanders, which were the Redskins at the time, obviously Troy's team. When the Favre got to the Packers and they became physical and they signed Reggie White, like Leroy Butler, every team was physical. And you would say some of the teams now, like the Chiefs have been really good. I wouldn't call them the most physical squad, right? Now, they would say like, fuck, we'd take our chances in the 90s against anyone. I'd be like, yeah, I would take your chances too. You probably could, but you got Mahomes. But for the
Chiefs
most
also
part,
kind of outsmarted the Niners, right?
What do you mean? Oh, in the Super Bowl?
No. This year, like they used their speed against the Niners' aggressiveness.
For sure. But when the Niners were equals with them, because you would say at that time, like with the injuries, they definitely were not equals. In the Super Bowl, and the Chiefs were fucking flying high, Niners kind of hit them in the mouth early. Now, ultimately, their skill and I think there's a pretty good chance. Because one thing I'd push back with Troy, and I agree with him on the whole. Like, do the Chiefs ever have to be the Niners, or do they just have a top 5 quarterback of all time and it won't matter? And they might just be an outlier. But for the most part, most teams do not have Patrick Mahomes. So, like, the Minnesota Vikings. If the Niners get the Minnesota Vikings in the first round, I guess they probably wouldn't because Minnesota is going to win the division. But let's just say the Niners play, I don't know who they'd play, the Cowboys.
Dallas.
I guess they could play the Giants or Seattle. Like, they're going to be a favorite and they'd be at home.
Yeah, right now it'd be the Giants.
Let's just skip to the second round. The Niners let's just say they win the division. They're the 3. They win 11 games. They're 11-6. Minnesota's 12 or 13 win team. They're the 2. Niners win. Minnesota wins. The Niners play Minnesota at home. Skull. You know what a lot of football people are going to say? Especially, I would say, in Troy's fucking, era. Niners are going to hit him in the mouth and break him. I'll take the Niners in this game because I think they're tougher than Cousins and that offensive line and that culture. And that's where I would agree. Now, I would say there are teams like I think Buffalo's pretty physical. I think the Eagles are pretty physical. Like there are teams that – because your physicality comes from your offensive and defensive lines. Now, Kyle's physicality comes from he runs the ball a lot and he's got like he plays with a fullback, which I think guys like Troy really appreciate. Most teams now just you and I love Juszczyk. Like Kyle's he's our guy. If Kyle's a free agent, like his options for being a 6-time Pro Bowler and clearly an awesome NFL player in the history of the league, like every team would want him. But because of the era he plays in, half the teams don't even have the option of taking him, right? Which isn't the case. Like if he was a defensive tackle, he would be, who knows? He'd make 20 million. My girlfriend's like, how much? Wait, 71's the best player? I'm like, yes, 71 is the Niners' best player. She's like, how much does he make? I'm like, $20+ million. But there's certain players like Kyle Juszczyk. Everyone will want Trent Williams. Everyone will want Bosa. I think the league, though, is like how many teams really use a fullback? Some of Kyle's guys do. But even some of Kyle's guys, like Sean McVay, he actually doesn't really even want to, right? He'd rather spread it out. Like Kyle, no matter what, if Kyle had Patrick Mahomes, he would still have Kyle Juszczyk, right?
Yeah, but I do wonder in another era, maybe if we talk to Juice in the offseason, we'll have to ask him this. Like, would he have been a tight end in 19?
Well, he'd have been more of a hybrid than like Low Neal probably. Right. But you watch him tonight, there was a run play. His ability, like he is not – he's just so fast and so coordinated in the open field that – and maybe there's a different level. And this is where you can't really compare eras. Like ultimately, like he's blocking Budda Baker in the open field. If he's blocking consistently like Bill Romanowski or just different type players, the game and who you're playing against has just changed. So you could argue it's not even fair to compare eras, right? Yeah. The game is just completely different.
But I do think
but Kyle, I guess ultimately he is playing a style that was consistently played in the 90s now in 2022. And it's when he's been healthy, it's worked with not a top 10 quarterback, right? That's what's impressive.
But it's what makes the Niners frustrating at times. Because on paper, to Troy's point, it's exactly what you'd want. A dynamic offense with a physical team is the perfect team, right? Isn't it? A physical, tough-nosed, athletic, fast, hard-hitting defense and a physical run game with a dynamic pass game because you have skill players that are unique is the perfect team. Like on paper or when the Niners are at their best, to me, they look like the perfect team except for not having an all-pro, like Hall of Fame level quarterback. But that's what like when they play as designed, it's exactly what you would design for your team.
Yeah.
And it's what makes, the way they play against the Falcons frustrating. Because when you see it in front of you, like on Monday night against the Cardinals, I think you react like Troy. Like, yes, this is a top 5 NFL team. This team, all right, let's just go through the playoff teams right now. Philly, Minnesota, Tampa, Dallas, the Giants, and Seattle. I mean, okay, Philly, let's just say Philly's better. They're 9-1. They've earned that. I mean, is Minnesota better? Is Tampa better? Is Dallas better? Are the Giants better? Seattle better? AFC, Kansas City. Beat them, 8-2. Okay. Miami.
Kansas City for sure. Yeah. I would say Kansas City and Buffalo are better than the Niners.
Sure. Miami,
well, I'd say the thing with Tampa and Miami, we're going to find out here right around the corner, right?
I just think it's hard to come up with 5 teams that nobody would argue. I don't think you can come up with 5 teams that nobody would argue are better than the 49ers.
One team that I think is it's going to be really tough. Well, I think Tennessee for sure. Actually, Tennessee's version, who's kind of looking like them right now, and the Niners play them on Christmas Eve, is Washington. Yeah. They're kind of playing, run the ball, they're physical. Well, who's their coach? A guy that played on the 85 fucking Bears. The knock on Ron, he's like kind of old school, a little archaic, Well, I'm watching their team going, they kind of got an old school vibe to them.
Good running back.
Him and Jack, like they're kind of kicking ass and taking some names. They're physical. They got a lot of big players. Their defensive line, Chase Young, I think officially was activated today. Like it's more than likely he's going to play this week. You could argue, like, you watch, that game will be tougher than one of like the Tampa or Miami games at home. I could see them winning one of those games by double digits and the Commander game being like a tie game in the fourth quarter. I feel like the Commander game has tough game written all over.
Saturday. It's going to be a Saturday.
Well,
right?
who are you betting on right now? Giants or Commanders moving forward?
Commanders.
For sure. If the Niners could, like, would you rather play? I'll give you an audible. You can insert the Giants in this game instead of the Commanders. Would they do that?
1,000%. I was actually looking at the playoff standings going like, yeah, you actually want the Giants to make the playoffs because you'd happily play them.
Having physical players, like, I don't know why I've watched a decent amount of Lions football. One reason the Lions like have something is because their offensive line is good, which is a physical thing, and they can run the ball. And the last several weeks when they've won 3 straight games, their star pass rusher, who is a Bosa-like, and I'm not just saying that because he's a white guy, but he's 6'7", he's really good. Like, he wrecks shop. So when you have physical players, like, you impact your will. Now, the Chiefs historically have kind of not been the most physical team, but they've had the best quarterback in the league, right? So they just overcome you nonstop. But, like, you watch the Chargers last night, you're like, where is their physical will? They just don't have it, right? They have this quarterback who fucking leads them on a game-winning drive with under 2 minutes left. You're like, God, what more is this long-haired 6'6" guy supposed to do? They're just kind of soft. And I do think Troy appreciates when you're an offensive coach, and he's obviously a big North Turner guy, but your defense is really physical. And I give Kyle, like, Kyle gets credit for that, right? Because his defense has been physical really for a long time now.
Without question. You get in return what you care about. You've been
also who you hire. Like, he's, Saleh
and John Lynch.
And John, yeah. Which, think who he is. He factors in big. Because I was thinking tonight, like, where they get credit, and it was clear early on, and you and I have talked to him about this specific player, and we know, like, they have this affinity. Like, Hufanga really represents, like, Kyle John. Like, they loved that guy last year. Remember, they were like, you guys don't think we'll start this guy? They wanted to start him last year, and this year was easy for him. That's a guy, like, when everyone's, like, blowing Debo and blowing Kittle, and listen, I'm guilty, they love the Hufanga plays. I feel like when those two guys, like, tomorrow over coffee, right? Like, when they cross each other, like, tomorrow, like, 8:45, and they've been in the office for 3 hours and, like, pouring a little vanilla cream, and they look at each other like, how about Hufanga on that third down in the third quarter, right? That's what they get off on, which not every offensive guy does. And listen, Sean McVay values defense. Mike Shanahan, I was listening to Russillo's podcast. He had Damian Woody, who played for the Patriots for a while. And Russillo asked him, like, what teams did you think were pussies and what teams did you think were tough? And he's like, honestly, the one team in the 2000s that always gave us trouble were the Mike Shanahan Denver Broncos. I do think there's just something to, like, that goes back to, like, the Walsh teams and the 49ers forever have always been known as this offensive operation. But under Bill Walsh, I mean, George Seifert was technically a defensive coach, but he inherited Walsh's squad. Mariucci's teams, and obviously Harbaugh, and now Kyle, like, they've always had really good defenses. They have not, I mean, obviously Walsh, I mean, those teams had, like, some incredible offenses. But the Harbaugh and Kyle Shanahan teams, like, have been known for physical running offenses and good defenses, right?
You'll like this. I haven't told you this yet, but when I was doing the Air Force game this week, we talked to the head coach of Air Force, Troy Calhoun. And he was on the Broncos staff with Shanahan. He was on the Texan staff with Kubiak, where Kyle was the receiver coach. And one thing he said was, everyone thinks we run triple option, but we're not really an option team. We run a lot of, like, Mike Shanahan run game concepts.
Like zone stuff.
He's like, we're not really an option team if you really watch what we do. a lot of it comes from Mike Shanahan. And I had a coach early in the year say that their triple option at Air Force is way different than everybody else's. Like, it's different than Georgia Tech. It's different than the other service academies because it really is kind of dynamic and complicated. They have led the nation in rushing for 3 straight years. They have been top 2 in the nation in rushing for 40 straight years. Now, obviously, they haven't been doing Mike Shanahan offenses for 40 straight years.
God, he's been at the Air Force a long time.
16 years. And the guy he played for, Fisher DeBerry, I think got the job in like 82 or 84. They've only had 2 coaches forever.
He was the quarterback there in the 80s.
He was the quarterback there in the 80s. He took over for the guy that he played for. So that guy was there a long time. But think about that. So the place where they have to find other ways to run offense because they're not going to have the most skilled guys, right? At Air Force, you're not going to have red shirts. You're not going to have transfers. All your guys are 4-year players because Congress only pays for 4 years of school. So you don't have any red shirts.
No one red shirts?
You can't red shirt. You get 8 semesters of tuition. That's it. Then it's time to
can we put a motion to Congress to give these guys an extra year?
That's what Troy Calhoun said. I said, well, have you asked? He's like, the orders come down and we just follow the orders. But clearly he made it clear, like, yeah, it'd be great to be able to.
Oh, because he's an order guy because he was obviously an Air Force.
He's like, this is how it works. Like, we're the Air Force Academy. We don't get to. But he has said it, like he thinks they should be allowed to redshirt. But John, the point is, like, here's a team that's built on not one of their players got an offer from Colorado or Colorado State, not one. And they're leading the nation in rushing for the 3rd straight year. And they run the Shanahan stuff. Think about that. Like, they look at it and go, well,
remember, he's sneaky, like, interviewed for some NFL jobs in the past.
Yeah, he has. Yes. But their thing is like, well, we're not that talented. What do we do? Well, let's run the Mike Shanahan run game and we'll lead the nation. How about that? So I thought that was a pretty interesting kind of insight into what that run game can do for you if you execute it with, obviously they do other things, but
they dominate the game you were
at. Yeah, I think they put up 482 yards. They did not complete a pass.
They're in the Mountain West.
Did you hear what I just said?
You say that one more time?
I think it was 482 yards of offense without a completed pass. They did not complete a pass.